About Navan. I'm just so happy to be able to introduce Dan and Aoife. They do an amazing work over in the Wildlife Rehabilitation Hospital over in Tarnary Pub, which is located here in Navan, just outside of Navan in County Meath. Every time I walk through the doors, I'm blown over about what they have achieved, what they're doing, the amount of volunteers that are there, and the care that they give to the animals. So first off, Dan and Aoife, thank you so much for coming. So would you just introduce yourselves really and a little bit about yourself if you want to just to kickstart?
We're delighted to be here, and thank you, Aisling, for that lovely introduction. I'm the animal manager here at the Wildlife Hospital. I've been working with animals for rehabilitation for the last 18 years, and I was delighted to come on board and be a part of this amazing project.
I'm Aoife, and I am in charge of the education and the social media and the media in general. Just kind of landed with that, but we've been receiving some great coverage, which is amazing, and it's really helped our profile. So I've been helping out with Jan for some years now in wildlife rehab, and I've also come from a teaching background as well, and kind of an event organization background as well, so I have a few things going on. And yeah, so I ended up being part of this project through Emma. I know Emma quite a long time. Emma Higgs is the hospital manager here and the brains behind the whole thing. And so myself, Dan, and Emma have been here since January, just trying to get this off the ground. So
I can't get over the amount of times every time I walk in, the change within, it's just at warp speed downstairs in the facility in the hospital is incredible. And could you tell us a bit like why Navan, or how did that come about?
Well, Navan came about for a number of reasons. We were looking around, we were trying to stay within the locality of the headquarters of WRI, and that is in Duleek. So we were looking kind of all around this area and down towards North County Dublin, and even we went down as far as Kildare at one stage as well, which probably was a little bit further, but you know, that's we were keeping our options open. And then we got a call to say that this site was available here from the McCarthy family. Excellent. In Navan. And I guess what really appealed to us about it was that, first of all, the proximity. Navan is just such a great location in terms of, you know, we've got obviously the M3 is just there, the N2, we've got Ashbourne, Trim, Dublin, you know, Drogheda, you name it. We're really, really kind of ensconced in so many different communities, and we've obviously got the Hill of Tara and Newgrange, and there's a lot of things around the area that are already very attractive to people, and already the wildlife is in abundance. I mean, we see it here, even just in the hospital, that, you know, the creatures that we have living on the grounds of the hospital, which is great. Like, they're not just patients, they actually choose to live here. So that's amazing as well. So then, of course, the site itself had the, as you've seen, Aisling, the stable blocks, which were fantastic. So that was ready to go for, you know, for housing animals and just basically repurposing. And then all the land out the back as well, and the large barn. So beautiful site, fantastic location, and great family. Like, they've been brilliant as well, and they've really made us welcome, as have everyone in the whole locality. So we've been blessed.
We have a fantastic team of volunteers, you know, from helpliners who are working all the time. We have transporters, first responders. We have the volunteers obviously here on the ground as well. So we've just an amazing amount of volunteers that make all of this work, you know. Me and Emma and Aoife are obviously heading in and doing our best, but we couldn't do it without all this amazing support from everybody else and the public as well. So
yeah. Colossal team effort, really. And I mean, you saw that firsthand, and you're part of it as well. And, you know, every little tiny bit is what's making this hospital what it is. And, you know, as you say, you can't believe how far it's come from when you kind of first saw it. And, you know, we arrived obviously in the very, very early days, and it was flooded, and then it was covered in snow. And there was always one disaster after the other. So we've actually kept a logbook, because we figured there's a novel in here somewhere. But like that, it was just a whole community came together. And this has literally been built, as you know, with no funding, purely from volunteers' expertise, time, knowledge, goodwill. It has been phenomenal, and such a positive project to be part of.
Phenomenal is the word that sticks out in my head when I think of the hospital, and just like you say, the work involved is just staggering, phenomenal, and it's a credit to you. We're dying to see what the presentation is, and I know everyone here on the call is dying to see it. So I'm going to hand it over to you. We're just going to give you some control of the screen.
This is just to give you a little oversight as to who we are as Wildlife Rehabilitation Ireland. So we have existed long before the hospital, but the hospital was always the ultimate goal for WRI. In that when we started, it was about 12 years ago, and it was really because Emma in particular noticed that there was no one organisation responsible for the wildlife of Ireland, giving it a voice and just to look after it, its care, its rehabilitation. So she thought it would be a good idea to bring together some people to set up an umbrella organisation that could look out for Irish wildlife and, as we've listed here, promote the rehabilitation of it, encourage the standardisation of its care, because there are lots and lots of wonderful people around the country doing wildlife rehabilitation, and we all work really, really closely together, and it's a great network. But it was just to standardize that care and make sure that people weren't going rogue and making up how to help animals. And obviously, so we support those rehabilitators as much as we can, and provide training as well. So we would have, for example, the vets and the vet nurses out in UCD, we would train them in their wildlife module. And also members of the public then can come along to various training sessions in various types of rehab and fostering and all the like. And then, of course, the final thing being the hospital here in Navan. So that's kind of us in a nutshell. We have a few websites as well that cover all the different elements of what we do. So ourselves, we have the rehab resource, and then we have the first aid, and then the hospital, and the crime, which is a really important one, and it's quite a recent string to our bow in terms of we've set up an app called PAW, and that is a crime reporting app. So it's a little bit like the one that's out there, the Say It, See It one for litter. This is a reporting app for wildlife crime as well. So it's PAW, and it is available on the app stores. So if you wanted to check that out, it's kind of a good one to have as well. So I think just looks a bit wordy, so we won't go mad into it, but it's really just to kind of, I suppose, to distinguish native from non-native wildlife in Ireland. So a native species is one that obviously has been coexisting for a long, long time with its surrounding environment, and then non-native or invasive, as they're often called as well, are species that have been introduced, whether that's accidental or whether that's on purpose. An invasive species is one that has not evolved here with its environment, and they tend to cause damage to our own native species, and they could be plants and animals and all kinds of different things. They're not necessarily just mammals, but that's kind of it in a nutshell. And the native wildlife, you can see here I've listed with their big fancy Latin names, but so I suppose the protected species are, as I've listed here, so all the obvious ones, and maybe some not so obvious. I mean, I'm not sure if a lot of people realize that all birds are protected in Ireland, and that's anything from your pigeon right through to your golden eagle. Every single bird is protected under the Wildlife Act. So I think the two that aren't protected do kind of come as a surprise, I think, do they, Dan, to some people. So you'll see now it's the fox and the rabbit. So neither of those are protected under the Wildlife Act, unfortunately. And I think at the time it was just due to their numbers. Fox numbers and rabbit numbers were never seen to be a problem in Ireland. And unfortunately, because they're not protected, foxes in particular are victims really of an awful lot of harassment and just crime. Right. And yeah, it's horrendous. But unfortunately, they are not protected. Now, they are protected kind of widely throughout Europe under a General Cruelty Act, but unfortunately not the Wildlife Act. So, so the hospital, in brief, is over here, as you know, not in the pub, as Aisling said, But in fact, behind the pub, if it was in the pub, would be in trouble. But it's behind the pub here, the Tarnary pub, and that's just a drone picture. You can see the whole site there. So down either side of it, there are the two stable blocks with a really large barn at the back. And we have obviously that land you can see behind there as well is also for the hospital site. So that's quite exciting. It's a really large site. So we have that under lease for the next 12 months. And we are building, hopefully, the permanent hospital alongside this temporary hospital, which makes the whole project extremely busy and quite challenging. But this is how it looked like when we arrived. As I said, it was flooded and it was kind of, some of it was falling down a bit. And thanks to the amazing volunteers, and we keep going on about this, but it really, I can't stress it enough, how much they have helped. And today it is kind of where it is, in that we now have this fantastic ICU facility, indoor enclosures for the swans out in the paddock. We have visiting vets and vet nurses, and we have the fantastic Jan, animal manager here, and all the wonderful volunteers that you can see here on the enclosures. And these have all been built by volunteers and donated by volunteers as well. So it really does demonstrate just how amazing people have been when you see where it is now and where it continues to go and grow. So where we are going is out into the field, and we have a beautiful waterfowl enclosure out there at the moment, which is the start of the whole thing. And we are going to increase, obviously, our expertise and our capacity as we go. And we do hope to have paid staff and all of the things you see listed here, including an education centre, visitor centre. We already have on-site accommodation thanks to the pub. It has an apartment upstairs, but we will be building new accommodation, hopefully, over the hospital. And we do hope then to open it up to a degree to the public in terms of nature trails and the education centre and the like, where we will be educating people on our native wildlife and just how they can support it and help it. So I'll hand you over to Dan, just to give you a little talk about rehab.
So what is wildlife rehabilitation? And we're often asked what that is. So it's the treatment and temporary care of injured, diseased and displaced animals and the subsequent release of healthy animals to appropriate habitats in the wild. And that's really what we're about. You know, we want these animals, we want to get them fit and healthy to go back into the wild and get them individuals to breed and continue and help the biodiversity and all that goes with that as well. So that we don't keep animals permanently. We're not a zoo. We're not a sanctuary in any way. If the animals can't be released into the wild, unfortunately, they would need to be euthanized, and that's done by a veterinary professional and done in a very compassionate way. But as I said, we're not a zoo, and we don't promote permanent keeps of wild animals. So why do we rehabilitate wildlife? And there's many reasons for this. You know, we have habitat destruction, invasive species, disease, wildlife crime. We've lots of, you know, animals getting hit by cars, and lots of, you know, a lot of the animals that come in, 90% I would say, come in because of man. Because of the dangers and the stuff that we do, you know, we're encroaching on their habitats daily, and that's just a little lever right there, as I said. But as you know, we are about helping these animals, but also about biodiversity and habitats, and you know, we want these animals to go back to healthy habitats too. So that was a little Everett that we've taken in. That came in, one of our first patients actually, into the hospital in February, and thankfully that little one is now back in the wild. We often see bats come into our facility. We have Amy, who is one of our good bat fosters, and she will take them on as well and mind them for us. That little lad these guys eat lots of insects. But when they come in first, they have to be hand fed and you know, minded around the clock. We always use PPE as well, so we're always very conscious of that. And just some common reasons for admission, as I said, and I'll just go through a few of these now. Mange, we see a lot of mange in urban foxes. We get, as we encroach on their habitats, they're coming into our gardens, and then we're noticing these problems with them. And that can be easily fixed now. Before, we used to have to trap the animal, bring them in for rehab. They could be in for 6 to 8 weeks. But now with new drugs and stuff that are being brought onto the market for dogs, we're now able to use them for foxes and treat them on site. So these no longer need to come into care unless they're really bad. So we're about progressing with wildlife rehabilitation and coming up with new solutions. Netting and fishing line is also a very common one. We see this on a regular basis. Hedgehogs getting caught in football nets, badgers, deers, and these are just children's football nets that we often see them caught in. And when we're finished with them, we should really just put them up 2 or 3 feet off the ground, or put them away in a shed overnight, so these animals aren't getting caught. And it's easy, simple things that we can do to help protect these animals. Fishing line, again, is a really common one. We had a swan and a cormorant come in on the same day recently, and that both had swallowed fishing hooks and lines. Thankfully, they were very lucky. They were able to be treated by the vet. We had them for 5 days, and then they were turned back to the wild. Road traffic accidents, again, we see a lot of these from gulls and foxes and deer, all these kind of animals that are just crossing into their own territories that we've built roads on, and then they're getting hit. At this time of year, it's particularly sad to see these animals being hit on the road, because they're often there's young left behind, and this brings us on to why we take in so many orphans then. So this little orphan fox cub, again, we came in March, where 4 little fox cubs were found underneath a porta cabin that was destroyed. And we had to take them in, and our team here helped hand raise them. And these guys needed to be fed every 2 hours, 24/7. Thankfully, they're now in one of our stables in a group, and they're going off to pre-release in the next week. So they did really well. But there's lots of animals that aren't found, sadly. We've lots of baby birds at the moment. Some of them are genuinely orphaned. Their mother's been cat attacked. We've seen a huge increase in cat attacks in the last 2 weeks, and sadly, a lot of these cases don't end well. The bacteria in the cat's mouth causes septicemia and other stuff going on with injuries from that. So we're seeing probably a 90% death rate in them coming in, which is really soul destroying for us here to see. When they, again, easily preventative. We keep our cats in at certain times of the day and evening. Or build a catio, or keep them inside permanently during springtime if we can. It's not their fault, that's their instinct, so it's up to us as humans to try and prevent that. Then we get to see these false orphans, as we call them. So these are orphans, these are animals that are taken into care that don't need to come in. So people would see a fledgling in their garden, not able to fly, and they believe that animal needs to be rescued, and a lot of time they don't. These birds disperse from their nests a couple of days before flying, and that's just a natural thing that happens. They all split up, and there's a better survival chance then if they all split up, and the parents will continue to feed them till they can fly properly. And these guys don't do well, again, in captivity either. The stress levels are not good. So if you have a baby bird in your garden, you're worried, take a picture, take a video, send it into our helpline, and we'll be able to best advise you on that. And as I said, we'll give out our helpline number later on, and that is manned from 8 a.m. till 12 o'clock at night. And we also have an emergency number then for overnights as well. Because last night we took a call at 12:30, and the hedgehog came in after being attacked by a dog. So we are here 24/7 for wildlife casualties.
I suppose, Dan, is it important to say just about the fledglings that, because it can become quite overwhelming here at the hospital with birds and leverets and rabbits, and even foxes on occasion that come in that don't need to be here. I think it is really, really important that people just observe these animals and call us rather than kind of jumping in. And it's not to take away from the good of people, because they really do want to help, which is amazing. People have become much more aware of wildlife and are much more willing to help, but I think it's knowing when to help. So I think if you can observe a situation, if an animal is sick, It is very often, if you look at it, it is quite often possible to tell that it's sick. Whereas with the fledgling, it's very obviously healthy because it tends to kind of hop around a lot and just flap its wings, but it can't fly. So a sick bird would not be hopping around and flapping around. They tend to kind of just be a lot more quiet, don't they?
Yeah, and fluffed up and, you know, head tucked under the wing. And that's general signs. We have, on our website, we have information about sick and injured animals, and there's a good resource there, isn't there?
Yeah.
But as Aoife said, observe, take pictures, take some videos, send them in, ask for an opinion, and don't just go and pick them up and bring them to the hospital or another rehabilitator. Always ask for advice first. And that brings us on then to wildlife crime. Sadly, we're seeing a lot of this. We've had 6 badgers and a couple of foxes come in already snared in the last, we're only here 3 months now, open to animals. And we've already seen that amount of animals come in. We've had a buzzard that was poisoned, that was found over in Loud. So this really is on the increase. As I said, you know, poisonings, snares, shootings. In the rehab centre I worked in the past, we've seen this all the time. Barn owls being poisoned, buzzards being shot and poisoned, you know, snares constantly, and this is just on the increase. And that's why we set up the Wildlife Crime website, and then in partnership with other organisations around the country, set up the app then, the PO app.
Can I just mention one that people might not realize is a crime, or maybe all of you guys, I suppose, if you're involved with the wildlife group here in Navan, you might already know the hedge cutting is a crime as well. So between March and August, so between the 1st of March and the 31st of August, it is illegal to cut hedges and trees. Now, unfortunately, some developers will get dispensation and they're allowed to go in and do it. But generally speaking, it is a crime to cut back, and that's purely for nesting season. All the birds are nesting now, all the animals are having their babies now, and a lot of them are using hedgerows and trees. So just to bear that in mind, that it is illegal to cut hedges and trees.
Thank you. And this, we're just going to play a short video of a video that was made for our Wildlife Crime Conference last year. So hopefully this will play. Oh, sorry. No.
This is a little animation that was made for us, which is, it's really good about wildlife crime. So just have a little look.
Wildlife crime, a terrifying tale. Ah, the Emerald Isle, the greenest place on earth for sure. Its famed coastlines, lochs, blanket bogs, fabulous mountain landscapes, and wildlife to die for. Birds and fish, plants and insects, wild beasts of every size and shape, bringing travellers and tourists from across the world, boosting our economy and swelling our Celtic breasts with pride that ours is a truly green nation. Or is it? Tragic to say, far too much of our wildlife dies at our hands. Poisoned, snared, nests raided, needlessly run over, tortured, wiped out through illegal destruction of habitats and hedgerows. Fish poached in their thousands, eels in their millions, songbirds netted and caught with glue, deer brutally poached in the appalling multi-billion-dollar world that's wildlife crime. This endless persecution is too often ignored. It's unforgivable. There are laws against it all, but the authorities are understaffed and underfunded. The chances of being caught low, the penalties small, and the profits often huge. It's a depressing uphill struggle, but there is hope. PAW was set up and has so far brought together over 120 organisations and agencies from across Ireland and the UK, along with their several millions of members, to push for real change. But it needs everyone. Yep, you too. If you see or suspect a wildlife crime, report it. The natural world is on the brink. Now, more than ever before, it and we need every single friend we can find.
Now, that was a hard watch, but that is what's going on. And as the animation said, we need to do our part. If you see a wildlife crime, if you hear about it, report it and make a difference. So after that, we said we'd play some lovely videos of this is a fledgling blackbird that we have in. These guys are getting fed every 20 minutes to a half an hour, depending on their age. And they open their mouth for food. Then when they've enough, they'll just sit back down in the nest and wait for the next time. This is a little leveret that we had in again. This guy's getting special critical care just to get everything moving and making sure everything's working. Gently, volunteers do this with such care. And the releases then, this is why we do what we do.
Best part of the job.
Best part. And we all love going on these releases. So it's amazing to see, from swifts and buzzards and everything else. Just a little bit about releases, I guess. It's not just opening up a pet carrier or a box and letting the animal back into the wild from the hospital or whatever. So just a little bit to explain. So there's two types of release. Hard release, and this is where the animal is released back into its location, and that's mainly where it's been found. And we use this for adult animals which have established a territory. So they're going back where they know best, back to their partners or offspring or whatever they might have, depending on the time of year. And that's a pigeon that was being let back into the local park where it had been rescued, and then a soft release is released back into sorry, I went ahead. So soft release is mainly used for orphans, and where they need to integrate back into the wild and get to know the environment around them. So I'll just give you an example of the soft release. This is a project that we did a couple of years ago on 3 pine marten kits. They were found beside their dead mother on a road. She'd been killed by a car and spotted by somebody and reported to WRI at the time. So Emma was able to organise National Parks and Wildlife Service and the students that found them to trap them. And then they came up to me in Kildare, where I rehabilitated them until they were old enough to go back to the wild. So back to Mayo they went. They were two of them were radio collared, and we built this pre-release pen here in a lovely woods high up in Mayo. So this was fitted out with a pine marten box. It had branches and climbing frames with food. And then after a couple of days, they went back out into the wild. The door was left open for them so they could come back and forth if they wished for food. And then they were tracked every day by a fantastic group of people who would go out, see where they are. And we have a lovely paper about this on our website, and you'll see all the Trojan work that everybody did and lots of people involved in this project. But after a couple of months of tracking them, the animals were retrapped and the collars taken off. But it just proved that these animals were able to go back into the wild, were able to live and hunt and be a part of the habitat again. And so rehabilitation does work. It was able to prove to us that it is worthwhile putting all this time and effort and money into it to see these animals return back into the wild. And at the time of us doing this, pine martens were not really coming into wildlife rescue at the time. They were only making a comeback at that stage. So now, thankfully, pine martens have spread around the country and they're making a great comeback and fighting against grey squirrels as well. This is a hard release. This was a buzzard that we released a couple of weeks ago. It came in with an injured wing. We only had him for 4 weeks, and then he was brought back down to Wexford where he was released. Oh, video didn't want to play. There we go. You can see this bird is in absolute prime, great feather condition, good body condition. Absolutely fit to go back. We have to be 100% about these animals going back to the wild. We can't let them back half right so that, you know, they might end up being killed or, you know, injured again. So we have to be 100% sure that these animals can survive in the wild. As you can see, this buzzard was ready to go back. Absolutely beautiful birds. So this is some of the wildlife that we've saved around Navan since we got here. So these are 3 videos I'm going to play you of this guy. It was a heron that we released in the ramparts only 2 weeks ago. We had our interns were involved in the release of this. It was a beautiful evening. Off the heron went.
Why did he come in, Dan?
So he'd been attacked by a dog on the banks there, and then came in to us for rehabilitation in an injured head and neck. So thankfully, after he was really sick when we did admit him, and you know, after 3 or 4 days of intensive care, he started to come around, and then he started to eat on his own. Then we moved him to a larger enclosure, and then a couple of weeks later, we were able to get him back. So that was a lovely sight. And actually, there was a family that had been out on a walk, and they stopped at a safe distance behind and watched the release as well. So that was lovely to see. This swift, actually, we only released the other day, had come all the way. This was found in Navan town, exhausted after flying all the way back to Ireland. So we just had to give him some critical care and some rest for a few days, and then we were able to release. It was actually not actually in the town, but just outside it here. So as you can see, fit and ready to go back. And hopefully we'll have lots of chicks this year. This was a long-eared owl that we'd rescued in Navan, and after 4 weeks of rehabilitation, this guy was ready to return. Thank you all for listening to us. This is our helpline number. Please save it in your phones if you find a sick or injured animal, or you have any questions, you know, as if it was saying earlier about fledglings or anything like that, please do ring us and we'll be able to give you advice. You can check our website out, WRI.ie, and you can catch us on all our social medias as well, so Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn as well.
Thank you so much, guys.